Okay, so this is a quick tutorial on the Mixing 101 in Pro Tools project. Everything in the instructions is pretty straightforward, but I just want to run through a couple of things to get you started so that if there are any things in here that are a little confusing or you're not sure of, you've got some references. So the first thing I want to point out to you is that there is a version of the final result we're kind of looking for right here at this link, and if you click on that, you can hear a completed mix of this entire piece that we're going to be working with. I'm not going to play it here in this video just because I don't want to take up the time. It's about 30 seconds long. It's just a little snippet of the piece, but at least it'll give you a sense of what's going on, and it's a good idea to use that as a reference, especially when you're starting out, just so you can kind of get a sense of what we're shooting for. Now, I also want to mention that that particular mix actually uses a considerably larger number of stems or audio source tracks than what you're going to be working with. You're only going to be working with the very essential pieces of the mix. So there are a couple of synth parts and a couple of backing vocal lines, for example, and a few other things that are not included in what you're going to be working with. But I wanted to make sure that A, it didn't get too complicated too fast, since this is literally the very first project we do in CMAS, but I also wanted to make sure that you did at least have the reference for what's going on. So anyway, the very first thing we've got to do is we've got to set up a session in Pro Tools, and we've been talking previously about the architecture, the file architecture for Pro Tools, so hopefully the general concepts here will make sense, but I wanted to show you real quick how to do that basic setup, which is right here in this middle section of the instructions. So basically what you're going to do is you're going to go down to your dock, and mine looks a little bit different than yours in my studio, but what we're looking for is this purple icon that says Pro Tools on it. You're going to click that, and it's going to bounce for a moment, and it's going to load a couple of things. Mine is going to load a few extra things in. I want to point out that I have some additional plugins, some effects processors, and a few other things in my version of Pro Tools that you will not have access to. You'll have this screen coming up, and it'll load through, and what we're really looking for is the next window that pops up here in a second that's going to allow us to name our session, that's going to allow us to decide where we're going to place in some other details. So right here, create is what we want. Now, you could use recent for older projects if you want. For things you've previously worked on, you can call them up. It keeps a list of the last several projects that have been, sessions, excuse me, that have been worked on. But we're going to use create. Under name, it's really important. Name everything all the time accurately. Use your whole name. If you want all the credit, you should use all of your name. That kind of basic logic. So I'm going to move this over to the side here, and it says to make sure that we name this a particular way, and this really is important. The name and the location of where we save it is critical in Pro Tools, and we've talked about that in class already. So it's supposed to be CMAS, your section, PT Mixing 101, and then first and last name of everybody in your group. So I'm going to do CMAS section 12, and I am doing the PT Mixing 101 project. And my name is Richard Maxwell. You're doing this in a group most likely. I'm doing this by myself in my studio, but the point is the names are there and it is saved correctly according to my instructions. The next thing I want to do is I'm going to leave all of these settings here just as they are. We'll get into what those mean later on, but for now, and it lists them over here, but just leave them as they are. It should all work just fine. We're going to leave interleaved. We're going to leave prompt for location. If for any reason location, the button is selected, make sure that is selected as prompt for location. That is really important. Then we're going to hit create. Now, we haven't actually created the session yet. What we need to do is make sure we navigate to our CMAS data drive, which is right here. If it's somewhere else, if it's in any other place, it's not going to work. So we want to make sure that we are in the CMAS data drive, and that'll be here. By the way, if you can't see all of this, that little arrow up at the top, make sure it's pointed up, and then you can actually navigate through to the CMAS data drive. Okay? I am going to now hit save because I'm right there. I'm not inside any other folders. I am not inside anybody else's other work. I have my own right at the top level of the CMAS data drives directory, and I hit save, and now I am going to get my blank Pro Tools session. And it looks kind of like this. There's actually a lot of different windows in the Pro Tools interface. We're going to deal primarily with just two of them for this project. The one on top here, you'll notice says edit, and then it has the name of my session. Now right below it, if I move this out of the way, you'll see it says mix and the name of my session. Right now, there's nothing on these yet because we haven't actually created anything inside the session to make what will ultimately be our mixer or to have any data here to manipulate. So we need to pull in some audio information in order to do that. What I'm going to do, however, first is I want to double check before I do anything else that I have the materials that I need to make sure that I actually have the right information. So in my instructions back here, there is in Google, it says down at the bottom or the top of the second page, it says download the raw audio data needed for this project. So I'm going to click on this link, and it's going to pull up another tab in Chrome for me. And I don't want to click on this folder. I can, and I see all of the individual stems I'm going to be pulling in, but I want to pull them all down at once. So what I want is just this folder here. I'm going to go up to this upper right corner here where it says download, and I'm going to download that. Now it's going to tell me that this is too large of a file for Google to scan for viruses. It's okay. I'm the one who put it there. You're going to be just fine. Hit download anyway. And then as it downloads, it's going to come down here. Now one of the things you should remember, and it's in the instructions, is that if you're doing this project, say in second hour, it's very likely somebody in first hour already pulled this onto your computer. So check in the downloads folder of your computer first. But in any case, I'll show you how to get to that in just a moment. I'm going to go back here to my instructions, though, to make sure that I have everything I need. And it shows you how to walk through and find the downloads. I'm going to do this a little quicker just to save you all time. So right here, I'm looking for downloads. I see it there. This is the file I just downloaded. It's a zip file, which I need to unzip. So I double-click on it. It expands it, and now I have a folder. And inside that folder, I have all of my audio stems. We're going to come back to that in just a moment, okay? The next thing it wants us to do is it wants us to make sure that we're actually going to be able to hear everything that we're going to be manipulating. In Pro Tools, there's a lot of things with virtual wiring happening inside the computer, connections we have to make inside the software DAW to make sure that everything works. Here's how you do that. We're back in Pro Tools. And what we're going to do is we're going to go up to Setup, and we're going to go to Playback Engine. And I want to make sure, in your case, you're going to use the built-in output. You're just going to plug headphones into the back of the computer. We don't need to worry about any interfaces or anything like that. In my studio, I need to do it a little bit differently. So I'm going to actually go and select this interface that says PreSonus Fire Studio. I have a whole bunch of options in my studio. There's a whole bunch of other things that I don't even have hooked up here. So don't let this list intimidate you. Your list will be a lot smaller. You're looking for built-in output, but forgive me for a moment, I have to change mine to FireWire Studio or this will not work for this demonstration. I am going to simply leave all of this alone, hit OK, and I now am back to what looks like my blank session again. I am going to make my window here, my edit window, larger. There's a couple ways I can do this, but the best way to do this is to simply click this the green plus sign right here, okay? When you're doing stuff here, you have some options in these upper menus, and we're going to use a bunch of things here. Don't use full screen view. It will hide all of these menus up here, and while it's not going to break the computer and it's not impossible to do the work, it makes it a little more complicated to feel like you can jump back and forth in the applications. So my really strong recommendation is just have it take up, the windows take up the entire screen, but don't have them take away these upper menu lists using full screen view. So anyway, moving on. Now what we've got to do is we have got to get those audio stems into Pro Tools. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the Finder, which is our little smiley face, and I already have this window open with my stems. Now if for some reason you're back in Downloads or it clicks you onto, I don't know, your desktop or wherever it is, you got to navigate back to Downloads, find the blue folder, that's in this case Mixing 101, Juliet's Rescue Heartbeats, open it up. I have all of my stems here. Then I'm going to click and drag so they all turn blue. Don't double click any of them, just select all of them. And I'm going to literally drag and drop them into this light gray part of Pro Tools. If I drop it onto this dark gray part, that's not what I want to do. Light gray part, I'm just going to put them right there. And you'll notice several things are happening. One, it's populating my tracks with their waveforms. It's also labeled every track for me exactly as it was labeled in the other folder. And I have all kinds of information now. If I go back to Window and I go to Edit, excuse me, to Mix, I'm in the Edit window. If I go to Mix, I now have a mixer. We're going to be playing a lot with this in just a moment, but for now, we need to do a couple things still over in the Edit window. So, here's what I very much need to have happen. Right here in the Edit window, I have the tracks, but they're not at the beginning, the start of my session. Is that the end of the world? No, but it's not going to be very efficient for me in the long run. So what I'm going to do with them all selected is I am going to go here and make sure the grabber tool, that's the little hand. If I have any of these others here, this will not work. But take the grabber tool and then simply drag them all over to the front, just like that. Now, if you accidentally click somewhere and they're not highlighted anymore, you're only going to be able to drag one at a time, but there is a little trick. Click on one and then shift click all the rest of them. And now you can take your grabber tool and drag them all over. So I now have the entire session ready to go from the beginning. The next thing I'm going to want to do, because I'm going to need it later, is I want to make sure I have a floating window transport. The transport is made up of these buttons up here. This is my play button, my stop button, my record button, fast forward, reverse, all these different things. On the Edit window, it's built in, and if you don't see it on the Edit window, you can go here to this little arrow and you can select transport and it'll pop up. If I select it now with the check mark, see, it disappears. So you can bring components in and out as you need them visually. But when I'm in the Mix window, I don't have a transport. So I need one. Go to Window, go down to Transport, and there we go. And you can move this around anywhere you want. I'm going to stick this at the bottom of my screen just for now so I can see the entire mixer. Now, when you play this, I'm not going to play the whole thing, but when you play it, you'll notice some things are happening. You can hear stuff, but if you listen to it all the way through, you'll hear it's kind of muddy. There's a lot of things that are kind of colliding with each other. It's not very well defined. It's certainly not of the precision and quality of sound of the example mix that was at the beginning of the instructions that we were mentioning earlier. So what we're going to start with right now is this middle row of knobs. This is called panning, and what we're going to start with is this idea of spatial placement. How far left or right do we want every single item? So think about this logically. If you were watching this song being performed live on a stage, where would these instruments, vocalists, performers, where would they be on the stage? Would somebody be in the middle? Would somebody be over to the left? How far to the left? Would somebody be over to the right? How far to the right? Where are those relationships going to happen? And we're going to experiment a little bit by trying to decide what gives us the most realistic positioning. That being said, there are a couple of standards we normally have in commercially released music that you may want to consider for this. You don't have to, but for what it's worth, the kick drum, the snare drum, and the bass guitar or bass line, we tend to like straight up and down the middle. Now, our bass guitar in this case is actually made up of two tracks, a left and a right. We're going to take these two tracks and we're going to put them straight up in the middle like that. Straight up in the middle, straight up in the middle, so they're both at zero, right up and down. I want to show you one example of how panning can make a difference, and I'm going to let you take care of doing the entire mix yourself. All of the channels need to be accounted for. So what I'm going to do is I am going to now just play a tiny bit of the two electric guitar parts. These are tracks 4 and tracks 5 and track 6. The way I'm going to do that is these buttons here. The S is for solo. It means you only hear tracks that are soloed. So you see when I press it on track 5, I get the guitar part, and all the other ones, the little mute buttons went on, the M's. One guitar. I'm going to now solo this one too. Now I have both. And I can hear both parts, but they're on top of each other. But check out what happens if I move one to the left and this one to the right. Now I can hear both parts a lot more distinctly. And that's the point of adjusting these panning settings. Figure out where you want to place things. Consider the fact that with our synthesizers, they don't have to be full left and full right. Maybe it's somewhat right and all the way to the right. Maybe it's all to the left. It's whatever you want it to be. Experiment. Come up with some kind of solution that you like the sound of. Think about your singers. Are they all going to be at the same place? Maybe your lead vocalist is in the middle, and maybe your backing vocalists are in the left and on the right. Whatever you want to do, experiment, listen. Remember these mute and solo buttons, though, or you won't hear things. All right? So take a moment. It's going to take you a little bit of time, but go through and select a good, what you feel sounding spatial placement for all of the tracks across the entire mix. And we'll see what you get in just a moment. Okay, so I have not gone through and done all of my panning, I will admit, because I don't want to give away any particular solution or influence you unnecessarily. A lot of this is about you deciding what sounds good. Always remember, at the end of the day, does it sound good to you? If it does, keep it. If it doesn't, let's take a look at what else we can do and what else we can change that we might want to do things a little differently. So, we've done panning. The next thing we're going to look at are levels. This is the volumes here that we get from these faders. Okay, and this is just like a regular mixer. So again, using our two guitar parts, left on 5, right on 6, I'm going to solo those again. Do we want them at the same volume? Maybe I want the one on the right just a little bit softer. Maybe I want the one on the left a little bit softer and this one a little bit louder. And you want to listen to all the different relationships. How does the second guitar, for example, sound in relationship to the bass guitar right now? Is that too much bass? Is it not enough bass? Try not to go above 0 with a digital audio workstation, with a DAW, the software application. Try not to go above 0. We'll get into the specifics of why later. Try to think not just in terms of adding volume if something doesn't seem right, but also reducing volume on other things if it doesn't seem right. Here's one other hint. Generally in commercially released music, and this actually crosses pretty much every style and genre you can think of. This is for pop music, rock, jazz, even classical, country, folk, EDM, whatever, rap, you name it. There are some exceptions, but basically if you use this formula as a starting point, it's a pretty good place to begin. The lead line, the focus is always the loudest thing. In this case, it's going to be the vocals because it's a vocal piece. The next thing down, drums and percussion. Next thing below that is your bass line, and then finally everything else. So from top down, it's focus, drums and percussion, bass lines, everything else. Start there. See what you get. Keep in mind, it's not just about the visuals. So, oh, well, then I take my vocals and I make them the loudest, and my drums, I'll bring my drums just down a little bit, those first 3 tracks. My bass I'll bring down a little bit further, and then everything else I'll drop that a little bit more, because it's how does it sound? Does it actually sound at the volume you think it does? So you're going to need to go through and you're going to need to listen to all of these things. So I'm going to give you a moment now to go in. It may take actually more than a moment, and start adjusting the levels. You'll notice that as you adjust levels, it may change some of your sense of what you did in terms of panning and spatial relationships. Don't be afraid as you're moving around on the levels to go in and make some fine-tuning adjustments on your panning. Again, remember, you can solo tracks if you want to hear them in isolation, or you can mute them if you want to take them out of the mix temporarily so that you can focus in on something else. Okay, so we've gone in and hopefully you have a mix now that has all of the spatial placements with panning and all of your levels are good. Again, I am not showing you my solution to this, not because I can't do it, but because I don't want to unduly influence you. This needs to be about your instincts and your musical insights, not about mine. I just want to make sure you understand how everything works within the program. So the next thing we're going to do is we need to shape the tone. We're going to do that with an equalizer. We are going to put an equalizer on every single track. I'm going to show you how to do this on one of them, and then I'm going to have you do this to all of them. I'm going to use track number 5 again. I'm going to solo it, and I'm going to go up here to this very top this very top block here. There's a little column that says Inserts A through E, a label, not a column. And I am going to then select this dot here, and I'm going to insert into my what's called, this whole thing is called a channel strip, by the way. I'm going to insert an equalizer. So I have some subcategories under plugin. Now I have a lot of equalizers in my studio. I am just going to use the one that you are going to use. EQ3 7-band mono in this case. Click it and it looks like this. What do you do with an equalizer? Well, you can shape frequencies. I'm going to show you the basics of what it does here. I can grab with the mouse any one of these little dots and I can move it around, and when I do that it will emphasize a particular frequency set or it will attenuate, reduce a particular frequency set. So for example, let me let this guitar play a little bit for you. And while that's playing, notice that if I raise more mids, more highs, very bright, more lows, less mids, less highs, and I can move everything around. I can swirl, kind of a very odd little wah-wah effect here if I want. We'll talk about wah-wahs another time. But in any case, I can manipulate the shape of the sound of that guitar. However, it's a lot of knobs and a lot of dials. Don't worry about that. Start with something far more easy to understand. Go up to presets, factory default, click on it. There's a bunch of subcategories here. Electric guitar. Start with a preset that assumes it's well recorded, that this stem was created in an optimal setting, which it was. Guitar, electric, 7-band. Don't pick cut harshness or add clarity. Assume those things are all okay. Electric guitar, 7-band. It gives me a really good EQ curve to start with. I'll play it for you. As opposed to without it, when I bypass, it's muddier, it's a little darker. You can make adjustments too. You can grab the dots and start playing with stuff. Now just keep in mind something. If I start to just grab dots and boost everything, for example, and now everything's way up high and it looks kind of neat and pretty and colorful, I'll grant you that, but all I've really done is turn up the volume. I am just adding level. I don't want to do that. Start with the basics and see what you can do. You're going to need to insert an EQ across every single channel strip, all of them. Then go in and find the preset that works for you. Okay? All right, so I'm going to let you do that. And then again, as you listen, solo some tracks. Mute the tracks as you need to so you can hear them in the context of each other, the big picture, the little picture, whatever you got to do. Keep in mind that again, as you make EQ selections, it may affect what you sense about your levels, so you may need to readjust those a little bit. It may affect some of the decisions that you feel you were making about the panning that need to be adjusted as well. Do not be afraid to make adjustments. Okay, so now we should have panning, we should have levels, and we should have EQs for every channel strip in our session. The next thing we're going to do is we are going to take a look at probably the most difficult processor for most people to get an understanding of early on. It's called compression. Basically what it controls is acoustic energy. In the simplest terms, just to get us started, think of it as how much punch, how much drive, how much is it going to cut through the mix and be that much more distinct. It doesn't mean distorted, and it doesn't mean noisy, and it doesn't necessarily mean louder. It's more about, like I said, the acoustic energy is really the bigger issue with it. So, how are we going to do this? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to go back in to our channel, and we are going to now place underneath the equalizer. Don't put it in place of, but after the equalizer, we're going to insert, under plugins, dynamics. And again, I have a lot of processors here. You're not going to have that long of a list. You're going to use one that's called Dyn3 compressor limiter, that one there, okay? So you select it, kind of looks like that equalizer did. There's a graph, there's a bunch of knobs and stuff here. Again, here's what I want you to do, and this one you got to just trust me on. Early on, compression can get so confusing so fast. I don't want anybody to overstress it. I just want you to start. You'll hear the difference when you apply it to all the tracks if you use this very basic sort of first-time usage idea that I'm going to give you. Go up to the preset. Find something similar or exactly the thing that you're trying to compress a little bit. Okay? Now in this case, you're not going to find a preset for an electric guitar, but you're going to find one for an acoustic guitar. Ideal, maybe not, but it's close for what we're doing as a starting point. Take the acoustic guitar, Now when I press play, I'm going to solo track 5 again, since that's the one I'm working with. When I press play, I'm going to get a meter, and I'm going to get to see a couple things happening over here. It shows me how much compression is going in. The little red dot up here shows me where the signal really is. I'm going to simply adjust one factor of this threshold. The threshold tells me when does the compressor kick in, how strong does the signal need to be. So if I want to go and all I really want to do for compression for this project, just because it's the first thing we're doing in the program, the first year, the first week, basically, is I just want to touch on those volume peaks. So I just want to see it come down really no more than 3 decibels here. So I'm going to move this, so we're just kind of touching the tips of the waveform. I can bring it way down and really squeeze it. Now, the further I bring down the threshold, you're going to notice it feels like it's getting softer because I'm squeezing the acoustic energy. I can make up for that with gain. This is adding signal after the compression. But I am also potentially distorting. I have to be careful. Again, you're going to want to listen to decide what it is you like. I think the acoustic guitar preset just as is for this project is going to work just fine. We will get into all these other knobs and all these other dials. Compression, like I said, is very tricky, particularly early on. It can be extremely frustrating even, but trust me, it's going to help you define your mix by allowing you to control the acoustic energy. So just like the equalizers, you're going to go through and add a compressor to every single one of these channel strips. Don't be afraid to solo tracks and hear them in isolation. Don't be afraid to mute other tracks so that you can compare things. Do whatever you have to do. Remember, at the end of the day, the only thing that matters, the only thing, does it sound good to you? That's all we care about. Does it sound good to you? If it doesn't, adjust something. If you're okay with it, leave it as it is and move on to the next thing. So that's the basics of how all of this works. Not too difficult, I hope. There is a lot of steps here, but you should be able to at least get a sense of a mix that works for you. And I'm excited to hear what you come up with. Obviously, if you need some help, see me in class. This is our very first project, but I think you're going to do a great job, and I'm excited to hear what you come up with.